Welcome to Beyond the Red Carpet. I'm Francine Brokaw, and with me again is Manny Pacheco, who has some fabulous stories about Hollywood and his career that we just couldn't let him go with just a half hour. We had to bring him back.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I feel so flattered.
Well, I'm learning a lot, and I'm a Hollywood history buff, but I'm learning so much from you. I mean, you are the encyclopedia of Hollywood history.
And I have 3 books to back me up at least. You know, it's hard to establish yourself as a historian of Hollywood or any kind of history, especially when you have such great storytellers like Robert Osborne was, and Ben Mankiewicz is, and Leonard Maltin, and there's so many great tellers of great Hollywood stories. I remember the Tom Hatton when he was on KNX, where I currently work. He was also a great storyteller. Ralph Story himself told great tales of Los Angeles and all the things that went with that. So these are people that are my mentors. These are people that I look up to, and who I try to pattern my stories, though, much like Ken Burns does in his documentaries. I try to tell 2 or 3 stories at the same time that run parallel. Sometimes they intersect and sometimes they don't. But at the end of the day, they are compelling narratives that seem to work. So I'm pretty happy about that.
In one of your books, you talk about one of the character actors I absolutely love, and I know him as Cuddles, and the world knows him as Cuddles too, but what was his real name?
S.Z. Sakal.
Sakal, that's right. I just call him Cuddles because he looks like a cuddly teddy bear.
Yes.
But you have a story about him.
And he hated that name.
He did?
He hated being called Cuddles.
Oh, that's too
bad. But he was so cuddly, but he just did not like that name. Yes, the story though, it's one of the more sad stories that I tell, because here was a man who had just a tremendous career in Europe, in his beloved Hungary. Well, as you know, Hungary was one of the countries that was run over by a Nazi aggression. Right. And he was smart enough to leave, but unfortunately he left his family behind, and every one of his the members of his family were victims of
the
Holocaust. And so he had hoped that after the fall of the fascism and Hitler, that he would have an opportunity to go home, but that was not to be, because then the communists and Russia took over, and then that was going to be it. And so his country never looked the same, and he never was able to return because he died in the mid-1950s. And he remained that wandering star, as the chapter title indicates. But the good news for us, he was able to leave a litany of memorable motion pictures, Ball of Fire, and of course Casablanca. He was just fabulous. Christmas in Connecticut. And
the Doris Day ones. What was the?
Oh, he made a number of those, yes, and usually with Jack Carson too.
Right.
He appeared a lot with Jack Carson. But I will tell you that there is one silver lining around this terrible gray cloud of the Nazi aggression, and that was folks like Sakal and Billy Wilder and Peter Lorre and Conrad Veidt, and these wonderful actors that we never would have heard of, and in the case of Billy Wilder, a director, producer, they were brought to the United States, and they thrived in the movie industry during the studio era. So we have just great movies made by Billy Wilder, and of course great performances by Conrad Veidt and Peter Lorre, and of course Cuddles.
Cuddles.
And Cuddles, yes.
He's a big teddy bear. Come on. While you brought up the studio system, do you think that Hollywood was better served during the studio system versus now the independent era? But
yes and no. I think so. I think yes, because the stories were just much better.
I agree.
Without a doubt, the stories were excellent, and they were crisply produced. And in the case of MGM, they made these magnificent movies with lots of money spent on the production, and it showed. But on the downside, a lot of these actors were not being paid very well, and it took some brave actors, in the case of Olivia de Havilland and James Cagney and Betty Davis. They fought for better pay for all actors. And in the case of Burt Lancaster and Humphrey Bogart, they were able to eventually form their own production companies, and they made great independent pictures. So there was an upside to the productions made in the studio era. There was a downside when it came to the pay for the actors.
But they also kept tight reins on their actors, so you don't get, well, we weren't in the era of internet and blogs and tweets, so I'm wondering how the Jack Warner would work with the tweets today.
I don't think he would do well with the tweets at all, but I will tell you this, in a documentary trailer for one of the productions that we're about to put into production, actually, I had an interview with the late Debbie Reynolds, and she described what was wrong with the studio system. And basically what it was is you would make a film and you would get paid for that film, and if for some reason you had a dispute with with the movie studio, they might put you on layoff. And you'll hear the narration in the documentary trailer. I think we're going to play it. And she says basically what they would do is that they wouldn't pay you, but they would extend the life of the contract for the time you're not working to the back end. So you were not able to negotiate your contracts until that back end finally came to an end, which could be, basically it's that same 16 tons analogy from Tennessee Ernie Ford. You're working for the company store, and that's it. That's just the way. So the folks lived well, and they made good money, but they could have made a lot more as they do now.
But they did teach them. They taught them how to dance. They taught them how to sing. They taught them how to elocution. Elocution, very good.
Absolutely.
I need the old Hollywood system.
But I will tell you that Shirley MacLaine is very vivid about the descriptions of what old Hollywood stood for, because she was one of the last remnants of that. And she says that, I don't think I could be the dancer that I was, or the singer that I was, or even the actress that I was, without the training that I received at the through the studio system. So,
exactly. Yeah. And that happened with Elizabeth Taylor, and they all went through that. Peter
Lawford, Ricardo Montalban. Oh yeah, they all went through the whole thing. Esther Williams, another notable.
Well, speaking of Peter Lawford now, he was at one time a bigger star than Frank Sinatra, but after the Rat Pack era, he was delegated to the very bottom.
Well, he got very comfortable because he got in real tight with the Kennedys. But the Rat Pack, their initial how they evolved, actually it comes from the collective that was created by Spencer Tracy and James Cagney and Frank McHugh and Pat O'Brien. What they called the Irish Mafia, where they would get together on a given week, and they would do a lot of drinking and storytelling. And eventually that evolved into Humphrey Bogart and Frank Sinatra and a few others. And then when Humphrey Bogart passed away, Frank Sinatra took over, and then they were renamed the Rat Pack. And that, of course, was Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop. Yes, and so the idea of actors getting together in a sort of collective and a fraternal and sometimes a sororital kind of way, that has a long history in Hollywood, and that's kind of a cool thing. I tell one of my stories, actually, and the actor I use is Frank McHugh. Now, people don't remember Frank McHugh as much as they remember James Cagney or Spencer Tracy or Pat O'Brien, but Frank McHugh, truth be told, was the leader of the Irish Mafia. So even though he was a supporting player on screen, he was clearly in charge of the Irish Mafia.
Wow. Okay. Okay, now let's talk about the documentary that you are making.
Yes.
Was the title just going to be Forgotten Hollywood?
Yes, and it's going to have a subtitle talking about the life and the career of Lionel Barrymore. For some reason, now I've written about 56 different character actors, but the story that resonates the most is the story I use in the describing of the career of Lionel Barrymore. Here was an actor who comes from Hollywood royalty. His sister was an actor. His brother, the great profile John Barrymore, was an actor. His father was an actor. He wanted to become a painter. And I've got some of his etchings. They're fabulous.
Really?
They're really remarkable. But he was from a family of actors. He had to go into acting, but he was such a good actor and with such a keen eye that during the silent era, he was assigned movies to direct. Now think about this: if you're directing a movie, you're able to tell a story in the same way a painter paints a canvas. So he was happy directing it because it became a three-dimensional etching. And but when his contract was sent to MGM, Louis B. Mayer kept him from directing. So a little bitter,
yeah.
but he determined to be the best actor he could be, and he was a fabulous actor. And after he made a terrific movie with Spencer Tracy and Freddie Bartholomew and Mickey Rooney and Melvin Douglas and John Carradine, a great Rudyard Kipling classic, Captain's Courageous.
Oh.
This is a kind of movie that when you turn about 60 years of age, you can retire. It was that good a movie. But he didn't retire, and as a matter of fact, he suffered from a degenerative arthritis, and they only determined the diagnosis after he fell down and broke his hip. So he went back to MGM to tell Louis B. Mayer, who, by the way, Lionel Barrymore was his favorite actor on the lot.
Oh, really?
There was nobody bigger out of everybody. He and Frank Morgan were the two kings of Hollywood in Louis B. Mayer's eyes. Lionel Barrymore came back and said, I've broken my hip, it's going to heal. I have advanced degenerative arthritis. I will be confined to a wheelchair in 1 year. And Louis B. Mayer's reaction was this.
Oh.
I mean, he was just stunned. And he says, I do have one other thing. And Louis B. said, yes, please tell me. He says, well, you did in 1934 assign me a lifetime contract at MGM that I expect to honor till the day I die. And Louis B. Mayer loved Lionel Barrymore so much that he allowed him to work even while in a wheelchair. So he made a litany of terrific films, including A Guy Named Joe, Test Pilot, Duel in the Sun, Key Largo. He was the evil Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. And he was a doctor, an active doctor, Dr. Gillespie, for the entire run of the Dr. Kildare series, while in a wheelchair. He changed the way folks look at disease and disability, and he inspired, of all people, Helen Keller, who went to the movies even though she couldn't see and couldn't hear, watched movies by Braille with a friend telling her the story by Braille.
Wow. When
she was told about the courageous performances by Lionel Barrymore, she contacted Eleanor Roosevelt and asked her to get her husband to start promoting campaigns for those afflicted with disease and disability, and use Lionel Barrymore as that pioneer. Well, FDR was also in a wheelchair, and he had just started a campaign to raise money to fight what they called infantile paralysis. And so that was the name of the program, the Fight Against Infantile Paralysis. But she got this idea from Eleanor that maybe we should tie with Hollywood, and every year on my birthday, he would say, I will get one of the actors to help us raise money for the fight against infantile paralysis. So folks like Margaret O'Brien, who was featured in my documentary trailer that you'll see, and Judy Garland, and Eddie Cantor. But Eddie Cantor could not stand the title, The Fight Against Infantile Paralysis. So he said to the president, you know, we need a more clever title. You've got all these children sending quarters and pennies and nickels and dimes. Why don't we just call it the March of Dimes? And FDR just loved the idea, and it became the most successful campaign to fight any disease in the history of the fight against disease and disability. And so much so that now when you look at a dime, there is a picture of FDR. So think about this. FDR is tied to Hollywood with his birthday celebrations to fight polio. Helen Keller is tied to Hollywood because she would go to the movies though she could not hear and could not see.
Amazing.
And Lionel Barrymore is tied to history based on the courageous actions of appearing on camera because he had a lifetime contract at MGM while in a wheelchair. It is a magnificent story that needs to be told in a documentary.
Oh, it's mind-blowing how everything is just dominoes together.
Yes.
And
so we've got the production crew and we've got the screenplay set up. We are looking for investors. That's really the thing. I think it would take about something like $100,000 or $200,000 to put because the stories are already put together and we've got the entire production crew ready to go. So
you're just waiting for the money and then you're going to make
cash to roll in and then we're good to go. I'm not going to mortgage my house.
No. Well, I think some of the viewers might be interested, but I'm not going to. If you want a bit of Hollywood, here's your chance. But in the meantime, your books are available on Amazon.
Yes, they are available on Amazon. As a matter of fact, they're also available at very exciting places. The Hollywood Heritage Museum, that's known as the Barn. That's where Cecil B. DeMille actually filmed his first production in Hollywood, was at the Hollywood Heritage Museum. Also, my books are in the Margaret Herrick Library of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, also in the Louis B. Mayer Library of the American Film Institute. And yes, my books, for anybody who'd love to read the Forgotten Hollywood book series, they can go to Amazon. And
they're fabulous. The stories are, I mean, you've only touched on some of them because there's a lot of stories in there, and not just of the character actors, but you have a lot of the big time star actors as well.
Yes, and the stars are my supporting players in my books.
Yes.
I relegate them. Yeah, I relegate them to these supporting stars. But you know what? Anybody who loves to hear stories about Errol Flynn or Betty Davis or Katharine Hepburn or Humphrey Bogart, they are sprinkled throughout my books. Absolutely, Cary Grant and Marilyn Monroe. People always ask me about Marilyn Monroe. And
really?
So yes, well, I wonder why.
No, she's really one of the main people that
people love to ask about.
Really?
But she's relegated to the supporting players in my books.
Yeah.
But yes, because she's too much of a star. My artists have to appear below the titles of films to make it to star status in my books.
Is that what Shirley MacLaine calls below the line?
Below the line, yes.
Yes.
Well, there's another term for below the line, which you're going to pay for a production, but I guess that's another story.
But you also have been in Hollywood yourself. I mean, you've got an acting career.
Yes, I'm a member of the Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. I started in radio, an iconic radio announcer who's still working. He's 95 years young and is still working. Art LeBeau.
Yes.
Began my career. I started my career at KRLA. I may finish my career at KNX doing weekend traffic, but I can do a lot worse than working at places like the historic KRLA 1110 AM and now KNX 1070 News Radio. But in between, I was able to get my Screen Actors Guild card, and I appeared in a number of commercials. I was also in the soap opera Santa Barbara, and I also hosted my own talk show on KCOP 13 that was nominated for a Daytime Emmy. So,
well, I think you're pretty well-rounded as far as Hollywood goes.
I've lived in the shadows of the business. I'm not one of the lucky ones that has somebody in my family who works in Hollywood, as some people will tell you they do. I've met so many people tell me that their grandfather was a grip at MGM, and when he was a kid, they would go into the lot of MGM in Culver City, and they would just roam around. I never had that kind of opportunity. My basis for learning about Hollywood was just a keen interest and a shared interest with my grandmother. So that's where it all comes from.
That's nice. I was reading in your latest book, Road to Forgotten Hollywood, Forgotten History. That's the last so far. Right. The last you're going to hopefully write some more, and we'll have some.
Well, if I may, I will tell you about a project that I'm working on with my sister. I also have a website, ForgottenHollywood.com, and I've written close to 2,000 blogs about Hollywood history that people can read for free at www.ForgottenHollywood.com. And
we'll put that up on the screen.
Sure. And my sister went through all 2,000 blogs and picked out 125 to 150 of the best blogs I've written that will stand alone in a book called Forgotten Hollywood, Beware of the Blog. And basically, it's kind of a homage to the efforts of David McCullough and Doris Kearns Goodwin to try to keep stories that are told in the first half of the 21st century alive. Now, they're my stories. Maybe there's a little bit of a pat on the back there. But the point of the matter is that I feel it's my duty to keep stories that were important between the years of 2009 and 2019, which is the life of this blog. And it'll continue on until I can't type anymore. So that's going to be my next project.
Well, they have those things where you can just talk into the computer and they'll type for you.
Thank you, Stephen Hawking.
Yes. Well, what I was going to say is, you mentioned in there Kid Galahad and a few other things. My husband was a child actor. He was in that show.
You see, everybody seems to know. My family didn't have any of that.
I know, you just came out of it from nowhere.
The closest my family comes to is that my father, when he was working, he's now retired, he made great furniture for many of the actors and singers and performers of the day, including Vicki Lawrence and Bobby Darin, and a great radio announcer, Roger Carroll, from KMPC. Remember 710 KMPC, Roger Carroll, with the best sounds in town. So these were individuals that my father made furniture for, and many, many more. So my father had actually a working relationship with some of the stars through his furniture business.
Well, and my father had a clothing industry in Utah, and when the companies came to Utah to film, they would do the clothing. So we got in there from that.
Well, there's
always some kind of thread, no pun intended.
Well, no pun intended. I was going to say that.
Beat you to it. But okay, so you've got the website that people go to, ForgottenHollywood.com. Your 3 books so far.
Right.
At Amazon.
Right.
And
my documentary and production. And one other thing that I haven't touched upon, but I'd like to mention, that I like to give back, and I do work as an adjunct professor at Fullerton College and Mount San Antonio College in Walnut, and I teach radio broadcasting. And I'm happy to train our next generation of broadcasters, hopefully folks that'll tell stories, whether they tell them on the air on the radio or television, or they turn to writing books or blogs or doing podcasts. It is my job to keep this legacy we call broadcasting alive.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it. And I swear, you're a wealth of information, and I'm sure the viewers have gotten a lot from this.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really I appreciate that.
We will see you next time on Beyond the Red Carpet. I'm Francine Brokaw.